Welcome to the Engage for More podcast. We are so excited that you're joining us today. We exist to encourage you to engage and to experience the more that Jesus came to offer you. Hi, my name is Pam Pegram, and I'm hanging out with my friends.
Hello, I'm Gwen Neal.
And I'm Kim Ball.
And we have a special surprise for you today.
Yes.
So I don't know if you're listening or if you're watching us on YouTube, but we have a guest, we have a visitor, and for the first time ever, we have a man on the podcast. So you're going to get to hear from a male voice. Kim, do you want to introduce our
Yes,
guest?
it is my honor and pleasure to introduce my pastor, Jonathan Wallace. And he is joining us today to really kind of go into the male perspective, the husband's perspective of marriage. And so I think that we're in for a treat. And definitely if you are somewhere where you can start taking some notes, take them. Or if you're out on a walk, go back and re-listen to this podcast, because I think that you're really going to want to dive in to this perspective. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for letting me be a part. What an honor to be the first guy on the podcast. I hope that I'm not the last. Hopefully that I can set the stage for more to come.
You are breaking the way.
Yeah.
Great.
So are you nervous?
I think I am a little bit nervous.
Girl power.
Well, this is episode number 150. So what a great way to have episode number 150.
Yeah.
That kind of seems like a monumental number.
It really is.
And God worked that out. We didn't even plan that to have Jonathan on episode 150, but I'm excited that that's the number that it ended up being. Yes. And the title of this episode is What Your Husband Wants You to Know.
Ooh.
Yeah. Dun dun.
Right.
We've been wondering.
Yeah.
We've been wondering.
And there's this incredible gift that God gives us in marriage, that we have a man and a woman who communicate differently. We relate to people differently. And it's meant to be a gift that we can have someone who compliments us. The problem is we know sin gets in the way, and what God meant to be a gift so often becomes a challenge for us. Yes. And so many times I find myself in a position of getting to help a couple reconnect and communicate in ways that they can understand each other perhaps for the first time, because these differences have gotten in the way. And what they discover is that when we learn to listen for the way that each other is really trying to share their heart and receive it, then God can do some incredible things, and we actually become a blessing to one another and not a hurdle.
Yes.
That's good.
That is so good.
That is good.
So we're like, okay, everybody is like,
we all got questions.
Can we all sign up for counseling?
Right. Well, let me just start here.
Yes.
Well, let's ask the question first. Why is your husband, if there are things that your husband wants you to know, why is he not just coming out and saying it?
Yeah.
Right? Like, why is he not just saying, hey, here's the things that I wish you would know and I wish you would understand? There's three reasons that I've found in 20 years of ministry that come up over and over and over again. And the first one is kind of hard. You know, I can't sugarcoat it. It just is what it is. And it's the most common. A lot of times when your husband's not sharing his heart with you, it's because you have shown him in the past that it's not worth it. Oh. There are moments where he takes the risk to share his heart, to share things that he's struggling with, things that he perhaps would want you to work on together. And based on the way that you've received it, with either defensiveness or maybe outright anger or dismissiveness, or you say, well, that's not a big deal, or you turn it back on him, he's learned, you know what, it's really not worth the price that I pay to share this, so he learns not to. A second reason I've come across that I've been able to help couples with is just to name the reality that you haven't made your relationship a priority. Right. Now, none of us like to come out and say that. We don't say, I don't make my marriage or my relationship a priority. What we do say are things like, well, we're just so busy. Yes. But the reality is that we prioritize things, and what we fill our lives with, the busyness, it actually is the part of our life that we've prioritized. And what's important for us, we make time for.
That's right.
And so if we're really going to prioritize a relationship, there's going to be opportunities that you create. They don't happen by accident, but you create opportunities to share with one another. And then a third reason that I've encountered with men, and I think I struggle with this a little bit as well, is for a lot of men, we have this element of our hearts where we feel like we're supposed to protect our wives from the struggles that we have. And so we don't share. And it's not that we're trying to distance ourselves or isolate ourselves. We don't want to be a burden. We feel like we're supposed to figure this out. We're supposed to be your knight in shining armor. We're supposed to bring answers, and we're supposed to bring things that help you and serve you, not the things that we struggle with. And so sometimes my role as a pastor is to help people understand you're not meant to be the savior. We already have one.
Right.
Jesus has already done
good.
for us what we can't do. You don't have to fill that role. You're just to be a partner. And I can encourage those guys. It actually is your role to come and share.
Yeah, that's so good.
That is so good. That is so good. So what are some practical things that we can do to, I know that and on the other end, when I meet with women, they are not willing to kind of go the extra mile to pour into their husbands and show them that it's worth it because their husband hasn't, poured into them. And so what are some practical things that maybe we can do as women to show our husbands that that the communication would be worth it?
Right. Well, I think number one is encourage your husband and talk with your husband about specific intentional moments that you're going to have together. I would encourage week to week. Every single week, we're going to have this time together where we can talk about how we are doing and what's going on in each of our hearts. The other thing I would do is I would pray about the way that you receive it. None of us are bristly or abrasive or put up a wall on purpose. A lot of times we don't see it. And so I would say, Lord, would you open my heart and my mind to see the ways that I've been receiving or not receiving what my husband is trying to bring? Everything from my posture to my verbal responses, how I affirm that. Do I, go into this mode of trying to just, comfort and make everything okay? Or do I affirm, I really am grateful that you're sharing this, and this is hard. And I believe in you that we can find a way through this together. And I believe that God's at work in your life, that there are greater things to come. And I'm so grateful that I get to be a partner with you as we figure this out together. Are you affirming that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is so good.
Yeah, I think it's really hard too I think that probably feels really overwhelming to hear you say that to a lot of women, because I have to speak to this child this way. I have to deal with that child this other way. I have to handle these situations at work. And now I have to be so careful how I have a conversation with this person that I've committed my life to. And why does it have to be so challenging and not be just, let's just talk,
Right.
And
it comes back to understanding that we are wired differently. And you don't want your husband to love you based on who he is. You want your husband to love you based on who you are.
Yes.
And the flip is also true, that God has created you, given you this amazing opportunity. I like to say that we get to love our spouse like nobody else gets to. That uniquely is our gift.
Yeah.
And God has given you this opportunity to love your husband based on the way that he receives love. And anything that's important to us, we're willing to work on.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so let's work on this relationship because it is important. And just like I tell men, I would tell every lady out there listening or watching today, is you need to start by just take the pressure off of yourself to have to do it the right way or fix it or just be present. And you just focus on, am I receiving it well so that I can be a partner? It's not about fixing it.
Yeah.
It's not about portraying yourself the right way. It's just, Lord, do I have a posture of receiving this in a way that's loving, in a way that's kind, in a way that's gentle, in a way that's affirming?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Jonathan, I would like to go back to your first point about why he's not communicating with us, and it being because we haven't shown him that it's worth it. We have said in our posture, our defense, our words, we don't value what he's trying to say. So how do we, after we are listening, after we've heard this, we're going to change. How do we implement that change?
Right. I think that I would just start finding ways to communicate with your husband that I don't expect you to have everything figured out. I don't expect you to be the savior of the family. My expectation is that we're partners in this adventure together. And I love it when you let me into your space. I love it when you allow me to see what's in your heart. One of the things that you discover about men is that we readily respond to the invitation from our wives. And we're motivated by that, and we're driven by that in every way that you can imagine, physically, emotionally, spiritually. When our wives invite us into our space, we are naturally God motivated to respond to that invitation. And it wires, it goes into the wiring that we have to pursue our wives. And so that's just your opportunity to say, step into what you're created to do.
Yeah. I feel like we're getting cheat sheets.
Yeah, I think this is good. And going back to, for those of you who don't know, Jonathan, you've written a marriage curriculum, Marriage That Thrives. And one of the things, I've had the pleasure of sitting through that teaching of that curriculum, and one of the things that you use is the 5 love languages. And I think that's had probably the biggest impact on me of sitting under your teaching on marriage, is that we have to speak in ways that fill each other up. Can you expound on that a little bit?
There's 2 things I love about the love languages concept. There's very practical elements to it, but the 2 things that have always stood out to me, I've been doing this for working with married couples intensely for about 12 years now. And 2 things I've discovered about it. One is that we have this huge tendency to love people the way that we receive love.
Yes.
And it's so important for us to get out of that space and that mindset
That's
and
a
say,
word.
how do you receive love? But here's the other part of this that is just been such a blessing to me in my own marriage, is understanding that each of the 5 love languages, so you've got physical touch, quality time, gift giving, words of affirmation, and
acts of service.
Acts of service. What I love about those, each of those 5 are ways that God gives and receives love. And so as I learn to love my spouse based on how they're created and how they receive and give love, it's actually a window into the heart of God.
Oh, wow.
And understanding in a greater way who God is and the way that God gives us love as well.
Yeah, that's so good.
good.
That's so good. I think that's one of the
amazing.
biggest things, is figuring out which way your husband, receives that love. Mine is, it may not be affirmations, or it may be different. And so finding, and I think repeatedly when I meet with women, is just saying, go pick that book up.
Yes.
Y'all take that assessment. It's huge.
Yes.
It makes a
It is
difference for communication. Yeah.
Well, what I'd love to do as we have this conversation, I'd love to share with you 6 things that I think your husbands are trying to share with
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean every single husband is trying to share these, but across the board, I would imagine that he's at least trying to share one of these and doesn't quite know how to share it in a way that you can fully receive it.
Okay.
So maybe I can share them one at a time, and you can give me a response.
Yeah, that
Okay.
sounds great. I love it.
that.
Let's
So
start.
Here's the first one, is that your husband has a deep desire to make things right. Almost without exception, when I sit down with a couple, or when I sit down with just a guy and we're working through a problem, almost every single time he'll say something of the sort like, Jonathan, just tell me what to do. Because we are wired to be fixers. We want to make it right.
Yeah.
And almost every single time that is running through your husband's mind, whether you're going through a struggle, or if you have children in the home and they're going through things, or if you have adult children and they're navigating life, I promise you from time to time your husband is thinking about, what am I supposed to do to make things right, to fix the problems that we're dealing with? And when he can't, that can be a little bit overwhelming.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
I do think that's a great point too, but how do we like biblically, I'm just thinking probably what he needs to do is surrender the marriage to the Lord, right? And so it's really not about him doing anything, but just submitting,
Right.
To the Lord and letting God help him lead through the marriage. So how do you work through that when maybe he's not a believer, or maybe he's just not leaning in to what the Lord says?
Well, I'll say one thing to start with that's been very helpful in my own marriage and in my ministry is just be clear as a wife when you're sharing your heart of what you want. So right up in the front, just say, you know what? I know you're very capable and you're very wise, but right now in this moment, I just want you to be with me and listen and hold me and hear this. And we'll talk about solutions later. But if what you really want is just to be heard and him to be with you, let him know that.
Okay.
So that he doesn't go into fixer mode. And then the second thing, when you're talking about our biblical framework and our faith, one of the things that's been helpful, but you got to be careful and subtle so that you're not one-upping him, but just find ways that he can receive where you remind him of what God has done in the past. I have this saying I love to share with people, that the best indicator of God's future faithfulness is his past provision.
Yes.
And so when I'm walking through a hard time, what my wife Jessie will often do is she'll just remind me how many, many times before God has come through for us.
Yes.
And it just helps me to understand, okay, it's the same God. He hasn't changed. He's going to come through again.
Yeah.
That's right.
So we
That's
should
good.
not remind him that he is not God. Or should we not do that? I'm sorry. I'm just asking for
Asking
the-
for a friend. Yeah. We're
Well, I would
just asking
say-
for those women out there, not us.
I would say if he's
Sorry.
a believer, just very clearly say, God has come through for us before. And if he's not a believer and you've got to be more cautious, just say, look at what we've come through in the past.
Okay.
See how we have made it through these things together. We're going to do it again.
Absolutely.
That's good.
Absolutely.
And that's encouraging.
Absolutely. Okay. So what are the,
All right,
what are
so the
next thing he's
second
trying
one,
to tell us?
because men are fixers, men carry a lot more pressure on their shoulders than what you realize. We don't know often how to, or if we even should, share with our wives the pressure that we carry. Everything from pressure at work, pressure with finances, pressure with relationships, pressure in our marriage, pressure in parenting. Sometimes there's pressure that is real and it's coming at us externally, and sometimes it's just perceived and it's internal. But the thing about it is, whether it's external and real or internal and it's just something that we've perceived, it feels the same.
Yes.
And it's so helpful for you as a wife to understand that your husband is often carrying this tremendous weight, and he doesn't want to hand it off because he doesn't want to be a burden, and he thinks that it's something that he's supposed to carry. And not that you can take it off, but just to be empathetic and understand that. And to say, just ask yourself, how can I come alongside him in this moment to encourage, to lift him up, to speak belief into him in ways that will be a blessing for his soul. And we're going to talk a little bit more about ways we can do that too.
Yeah, and I think too is like in my own marriage is just letting him know that this is not all on you. Like there's two of us in this. We're two of us together focusing on God. Like this is not all on you.
Right.
Like this is a marriage. This is both of us, and it seems to be able to take away some of that extra pressure that he's feeling. It's just letting him know that, hey, I'm right here with you. There's two in this. It's not it's not all up to you.
Right. And you're going to see a theme here of this idea of encouragement and building him up. But as you do that, as you say, I'm so glad that we're in a team together and you don't have to carry it, just follow that up with this second statement that says, and I'm so glad to be in it with you.
Oh, yeah.
If I could choose all over again, I would choose you
I love it.
to walk through this together.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so
I love that.
here's the third
Well,
one.
let me just,
Yeah.
I'm just playing, because I know there's so many people listening and I have so many questions.
Yeah.
What do you do when you're just not there? You're really not glad you're in it with him. It is hard. It is too hard. And you really want to bail, right?
Right.
That you're just there, but now you're listening to this podcast and you're listening to somebody tell you, encourage him when your marriage is just so broken and you feel like he doesn't see you, he doesn't hear you, he doesn't love you, he doesn't, how can you just put a pause on all that
Right.
and just show up to be that encourager?
One of my favorite passages that talks about marriage in Ephesians chapter 5, and it's that famous passage that we all get worked up about when it talks about the roles of husbands and wives. But the most important verse of that whole section is in verse 21, where Paul says, and love one another out of reverence for Christ. If we can't do that in our marriage, nothing else that follows that is going to be effective or fruitful in the way that God intends. So how do you lean in? Unless you have a biblical reason to bail,
Right.
And you really need to, there's a safety issue or unfaithfulness. If you can ask for God's strength to stick in that marriage and say, Lord, I'm trusting you, what you're doing is you're looking for ways that you can honestly, you're not fabricating or lying, but what are ways that I can honestly see he's trying or he's making an effort or he did do something really good. And I'm going to point that out and encourage him and give thanks for that and tell him the difference that made. And I'm doing that not because he deserves it. I'm doing that because I trust God to work in it when I do it God's way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And because we love the Lord.
And
want to
because
be
we do.
obedient.
And I
Yeah.
think it's a
So
direct
good.
reflection of our honor and commitment to God. Like some of the
Yes.
things that we have to draw upon, even as husbands in marriages too,
Yes.
because we're not perfect for sure. But we have to draw upon like, hey, this is honoring God. You know, I am going to muster up something. You know, I am going to look for the positive, even though I'm not receiving that. But I think it's just honoring God.
And whether you're a husband or a wife, you're only responsible for what you do.
Right.
You're not responsible for how they respond to it. You're only responsible, Lord, how can I be faithful in the role that you've given me? So here's why this is so important, that you come with this attitude of encouragement and lifting him up, because the next thing that he really wants you to know, and he doesn't know how to tell you, is that he's really not sure if he has what it takes to succeed in life.
Wow.
Whether it's work and business, money, family, friendships, whatever it might be. I love John Eldredge, writer, author, a therapist. He talks about this dynamic in the heart of men that we're all wrestling with the question of, do I have what it takes?
Now, that's so interesting. Don't y'all think that's so interesting? Because men seem so proud of themselves.
Yeah, like they've got it all together.
Yes, and they you can stand in the mirror and the wife is like, I look awful, and the man's like, I'm looking pretty good, right? like they seem to be so sure of themselves.
Is that
so
a
many
facade?
times?
But I don't think it's always a facade. I don't think it's always that they're faking it. I mean, it's easy to have bravado about things on the inside, and a lot more difficult to have confidence when there's something that really requires something of you. When I have to be present in that hard moment as a dad, when I have to make that hard decision for my family, when I'm wrestling with something that my wife might be struggling with and I can do nothing about it. When I'm wrestling with, I'm not where I want to be or where I thought I'd be in my career. In those moments, that's when that question bubbles up for us. Of, do I really have what it takes? And for many of us, we had fathers and they didn't know the answer to that question either. And so they're wrestling with it. How in the world can they speak life into their sons to say, you do have what it takes, and here's why? Because their father didn't answer that for themselves. And so somewhere along the way, as wives, this great gift you can give your husband is not to say you're awesome and, I'm grateful to be with you because of who you are, but it's to say, God has a plan for your life. And here's where I see God at work in your life. And here's where I can see the evidence of what God's doing in your life. And I'm grateful for that. And I want you to see it, because sometimes we're the last to see it. And so I see God working at your life, and I can't wait to see what's next.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. That's so good. That's such a good practical tip.
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Love that.
So what's our next one?
All right.
What else are you trying to tell us?
Number 4 is your husband feels more discouragement than what you realize.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's sad.
We all experience discouragement. That's part of the human life. It's just the thing is that as men, we usually don't share that as readily with others. And part of it is because somewhere along the way, we've picked up the idea that the feeling doesn't matter. It's just the solution that matters. Yeah. Okay. And so I get so task oriented, and we just start putting ourselves toward task. And this is where you have to be very careful as a man. And a lot of guys struggle with this. If I can't fix it, then I'll look for the distraction. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I'll look for something that's fun. I'll look for something that's easy. Or, I'm discouraged. I'm not the man at home that I want to be, the father or the husband. So I pour myself more into work where I get the affirmation. Or if it's not working at work, then I'll pour myself into a hobby or whatever it might be, because it's hard to deal with the discouragement. So here's where I encourage wives is you have this God-given ability so often to see the details and how things can be better, especially relationally.
Yes.
Be careful in how you communicate it. Because what you often intend to be constructive and helpful and build up your relationship may be received by your husband as criticism.
Right.
And when we hear I'm not doing something well, what I will tend to do is just not even try. But when my wife says, I can see this is happening in your life, or you're making an effort here and you're growing here, or you're really good at this, I become Superman. I want to leap tall buildings for her because of that encouragement and that affirmation that she's speaking into me.
Okay, just to lighten this up. Joe mopped the floor last night.
Oh, yeah.
I am going
That
to be
will make a
affirming it.
superwoman.
What? Yes, honey. I love the way you mopped that floor.
Yes.
Like that was the first time, and I didn't make a big deal out of it. I just said, "Oh, thank you for mopping the floor." I'm going to amp that up to like 10.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Affirm him again today.
Yes.
So he'll do it next
Girl,
week.
yes.
I love it.
Absolutely. Just when you affirm behavior that you want, it's likely to be repeated.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I try to overdo that, like over affirm sometimes. I don't know if there's such a thing, but just, go back, and when he does something as simple as doing the dishes, just thanking him. And then the next day, hey, thanks again for doing those
Right.
dishes.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes.
It's huge.
All right, so here's number 5, and you'll see these are closely connected. He feels powerful emotions that he's trying to keep under control. And men often get a bad rap here, where men are described as not as emotional or not as in tune with their emotions. It's not really across the board that men aren't emotional. It's just how we've been taught and conditioned to deal with those emotions.
Okay.
So where women, and I'm going to overgeneralize here. I'm not talking about every woman on the face of the planet, but in general, in my experience in working with couples in ministry, women are more likely to share their emotions as an opportunity to connect.
Yes.
Most of the men I've worked with in ministry, they see their emotions as either something that's got to be kept under wraps, or if they have more of a positive view of it, they see it as something to be leveraged to accomplish a task. And so we have really powerful emotions like anger, like frustration, but also emotions like desire, excitement, joy. And what we tend to do with those emotions is we're not using them as an opportunity to connect with our wife. We're using them as an opportunity to either motivate us to do what we need to do, or we're trying to keep them under control because the strong emotions as we've grown up, we've been told are bad. Don't let your anger, control you. Don't, whether it's maybe in a sports team, like don't be so emotional, be, methodical and be driven, or in business, don't let your emotions get the best of you. We've been taught this message over and over and over. And so we feel like, well, I've got to control it, or I've got to leverage it and use it for the goal and the target, rather than understanding I can actually use this to connect with this other person. And so it's important for you to understand he's not without emotions. He's just looking at it different than you do. And you have an opportunity, again, to invite, because we respond to that invitation from our wives, so that you can use it to connect as well.
That's so good.
So many good things.
That is some
Yes,
good
so much to think
This
about.
is just delicious.
All right, one more, and I think this might be the most important.
Okay.
Is that I would love for wives to be reminded that your husband really does want to connect with you, and not just physically. Your husband really wants to connect with you emotionally. He wants to connect with you spiritually. Even people who aren't sure about their faith in Christ, they still have a spiritual element to them. And one of the most important passages of all of Scripture, Ecclesiastes 3:11, says that God has placed eternity in the human heart.
Yes.
Every single person, whether they put the name Jesus on it or not, want to be part of something bigger. That's that spiritual element inside of us. And your husband wants to share that with you. And so your gift that you can be to yourself, to your relationship to him, again, it comes back to this invitation. Let's be on this adventure together. I'm so grateful that I get to do this with you. Yeah. I believe in you. I can see growth happening in you. I appreciate you. Look for ways that you can communicate. You make me a better person because I do life together. Ask for ways that I can be a blessing and support you and build you up for what you have that you're trying to see happen in your life. I want to see all of that come to be, and I want to be a partner in allowing that to happen. And just invite him into that because he really does want to connect. We just often don't know how to do that on your level or a way that you're wired to receive it.
Yeah. So should we initiate it?
I think it should be both. I think that the husbands should initiate connection and conversation. I think wives can. It just comes back to understanding how we open the door.
Okay.
Yes.
And so as a wife, are you affirming him? Do you understand his love language and speak it on a regular basis? Do you encourage him? Do you give him thanks for things that he tries to do for the family or for you? Are you doing those things that would make him feel safe to come and connect? And then we talk about this a lot. Are you praying for him? Are you praying for God to stir his heart for that connection to happen? Are you praying for God to open your eyes to ways that you might be a hindrance to that? And I would say the same thing to husbands. Pray for your wife. It's the most important thing you can do. Pray with her and pray for her. Pray for your own heart that God will be working in you to bring you to the marriage that you want, and the marriage he wants for you.
Yeah. I think the last point that you said about connecting, I think that's when you go to weddings or sometimes, they make these cute little things like the best piece of marriage advice. And I think the biggest thing for me is date your husband. Date your husband. Like the connection that you have when you get to go and sit across, of course we don't eat, of course I like to eat out so I don't have to cook, but really just so I can sit across from him, I can look into his eyes, I can tell him these things like, I see you working hard. I appreciate you. And just those times, and just last night we had this conversation again that like we are going to have to schedule this at least once a week where we go, put it in our budget where we're eating out once a week, not just to a fancy place. I mean, we could go to McDonald's for all I care, but that we have that connect time that it's not just physical, but it gives us time to do all of these things.
Right. It's a wonderful tool to put in your toolbox, especially if you're going through a season of there's a lot of stress or difficulty in your marriage or just a lot of things pulling you in different directions. Schedule 2 meetings every week. Right. Schedule a business meeting and schedule a relationship meeting. Okay. Right? What's on the calendar? What are the bills? What are the things we have to do? And then how are we doing together? And separate those two from one another.
I love that.
I do
That
too.
is
So good.
Go back to you, and it was just in passing, you said, so that he feels safe.
Yeah.
So what makes him not feel safe with us?
It takes a tremendous amount of courage for a husband to pursue his wife. Because in the back of his mind, he's always wondering, is she going to receive me? Is she going to reject me? And again, it's not just one area of your relationship. It's every area of your relationship. And every single time that he comes to pursue in a conversation or setting up a date night or whatever it might be, he's having to step through that courage to say, do I have what it takes? Am I the husband she really wants? I remember last week she was really mad at me. I wonder if she's still holding on to that. He's wrestling in his own mind about things that you might not even be thinking about, but he sees it as a failure. And he sees it as not being all that he wants to be in some area of life. And he's wrestling with that. And so he's got to step through that courage. So are you creating a safe space where it says, number one, you're safe with me, you're okay here. But number two, I choose you. I desire you. I respect you. You're the person, if I could choose all over again, you're the person I would choose. And that's what I mean by a safe space, because what you're doing is you're ministering to that wounded place of his heart to say, I know you're wrestling with this. If you're enough, if everything's okay, if you're everything I wanted you to be, and I want you to know you are.
That's so good.
Yes.
We're all taking notes. We're all going to have to replay this
Yes.
podcast as well. So, so what other points that you have for us today?
So I would just leave you with one big question to wrestle with, and that is, do you really see your husband? You know, I'm in a season of life. I've got 2 kids in school, and we're going all over the place all the time, as a lot of people are. And just to be honest, there are days where I probably don't really see my wife. And there are days where she probably really doesn't see me. We go past one another. We're partners in life. We're trying to make all the things happen that need to happen. We're co-parenting. We're maybe even encouraging each other and praying for one another. But do we really see each other? And so I would break it down into 3 questions. The first is, do you really see your husband, or do you see the version of him that you've made him to be in your mind based on unmet expectations or struggles you've had or even patterns of behavior? Is that what I'm still moving forward to in the future with? Am I stuck in the past? Is my past controlling my future? Or am I seeing him in the present moment? Another question to ask is, am I seeing him based on who I think he is, or do I see him based on who God is making him to be? Greatest gift you can give to anybody is to say, here's what I see God doing in you. Here's how I see you growing. Here's what I see God creating you to be. And then the third question is, do I see all of his failures, or do I see his intentions? We often see others based on their mistakes, and we see ourselves based on our best intentions.
Yes.
Yeah.
What if we learn to see each other with, man, this person is doing everything they can. So one of the first things I'll ever do is I'm sitting down with a couple who's in crisis. I'll make them turn to one another, and I make them repeat after me. I'm with you. I'm for you. And I want to see you win. Just to reframe the way we're looking at one another, that we are for each other. We're partners. We're advocates. We're cheerleaders. We're helpers. We're not going to choose to see each other based on the failures.
That's so, so good. I love that. I love that. So kind of wrapping up where we are now, and you've given us some really great tips. Do y'all have some additional questions for him? Some really good, but overall, like, what is something that, like Pam kind of mentioned, those women that we see that are just at the end of their rope.
Right.
At their end of their rope. They don't even really know where to begin because they're so far gone. And I think that's a lot of the women that we sit down with and that we see is that they just think it's too far gone.
Right. Well, you probably all know the place you have to start is prayer.
Yes.
You have to go to the Lord. God, we need wisdom. We need clarity. We need discernment because we can't see around the corner. We can't see the future. We can't see fully what's in the heart of this other person. So, Lord, you are going to have to pave the way, open the door, or close the door. You're going to have to show me what to do.
Yes.
But if you discern that it's worth working toward, it's worth sticking through it, and you don't have a biblical reason to walk away, then I think you've really got to come back to this question: God, do I really trust you or not?
Ooh, yeah.
Do I really trust you to do this your way? So it may be in a situation where, you know what, I'm having a really hard time respecting him because he hasn't shown that he's respectable. I'm having a hard time following his lead because he continues to make poor decisions.
Right.
So Lord, humble me to trust you. A life lesson that a mentor of mine taught me: you can make a right decision with a prideful heart, and God will humble you. Yeah. And sometimes you can make a wrong decision, but with a heart of faith, and God will redeem it. Yeah. I think that's what God uses so often in marriages, whether it's the husband or the wife. God, we may make some wrong decisions here, and I may choose to go along with something that I don't think is the best decision, but I'm doing it because I've got to come with a posture of humility and servanthood and lift this person up. And even if it's the wrong decision, God, I trust you in it because my heart is to be faithful to you. And what I can't change in this person, you can. And maybe I force things, I manipulate behavior, but you know what? You can have desired behavior and never have desired relationship.
Yes.
And so, God, I'm turning that over to you. I'm not going to try to change their behavior anymore. I'm just going to love this person because you're in control. And when I can't change their heart, you can. And so for the person struggling, it really comes back to that root that God is faithful and God is trustworthy and God can do what I cannot do.
Yeah.
And if you're both on the same page and you're both moving toward God together, I would just say focus on encouragement and invitation. You can't over-encourage. You can't over-invite. And just continue to have that spirit of, I'm glad I get to be your partner in life and we get to share life with one another. And we're going to hurt each other from time to time, but we're gentle, we're kind, we have the fruit of the Spirit. We're patient with each other. We're quick to forgive. We pour grace out upon one another. And my role is to continue to encourage you. My role is to continue to invite you. If I were talking to the husbands, I would tell them your role is to serve your wife sacrificially, to make sure that you communicate and live out that she is cherished and that you love her, and that your role is to lead her and lead your family. Don't allow someone else to take that mantle that God has given you. And every single step of the way, it's not because we're great or our spouse is great. It's because God is great.
That's right.
And I'm going to continue to trust him to just be faithful with the next step.
Yeah.
Wow. So good. So many takeaways. Thank you so much. We appreciate you so very much.
Yes.
And we just want to encourage you as you were listening and just encourage you to apply these things, to try them, to be an encourager and to invite. And if you are the woman we mentioned who you're just worn out and don't just ready to be throw in the towel and just give up, we encourage you to give it one more try.
Yes.
You'll never regret just trying one more time. And we're going to pray for you, and you be praying for your marriage, and let's just watch and see what God's about to do. Okay, so thank y'all so much for being here. We appreciate it, and we'll see you next week.